Hey there, I am Annette Schiffmann from Germany, living in Germany, and I've been with TFF for some 13 years now. I met Jan and Christina, who founded this foundation we're celebrating today, in 2002, when I was organizing, together with a few other people of course, a huge international conference in Berlin against the threatening war against Iraq. That's how we met, and we've been friends and working together ever since. And while we obviously could not prevent this war, we have been doing a great lot of good things ever since. I want to introduce you to a traveling exhibition I did 5 years ago that has been traveling ever since, much to my overwhelmed surprise. And I want to tell you a little bit of the background. As long as I can remember, I wanted to make a kind of impact to my surroundings. Mostly, I guess, to fight an overwhelming feeling of powerlessness and helplessness and injustice. And so I started very early. My first demonstrations, together with so many people of my generation, were against the war in Vietnam. It went on with demonstrations and work against all kinds of nuclear power plants in Germany. And it went on with the struggle against the stationing of cruise missiles in Germany also. And I learned it the hard way, that simply being against something never seems to be enough. What I learned more and more, and what I'm convinced of more than ever before today, is that in order to keep ourselves going, and in order to make a change and to be a change in this world, it's not enough to know what you are up against. But it's necessary to have a vision, what we are fighting for, what we want to achieve, what we need to have for us and for all people. And while human rights and war and peace were always my issues, politically, I was always convinced that we can only make a difference when we are able to relate the political issues to our personal life. And one of the things I experienced a lot, and so thus know a lot about, is violence in personal relationships. What I experienced and know a lot about is sexual violence. And so it's a simple conclusion that if you want to change the political area, you have to change the people. You have to change yourself, and you have to change the relationships between people. So a few years ago, I set off to create an exhibition on women and violence. That was the original issue. And since every statistics works with the 100%. I knew it would have to be an exhibition with 100 women. I didn't want to tell numbers. I didn't want to have long lists of what happens to who, but I wanted to have a face to statistics. And as you all might know, physical violence, sexual violence included, happens to nearly every 4th to 5th woman. Like, you look around in a room and you know it will be at least 1 in 8. Mostly it will be 2 or more. Men experience violence also as boys and as young men, but that is a different exhibition. So I started out to think about how could I do this? How could I show that many women experience violence? And how could I show it in a way that was most important to me? How could I show it in a way that would be beautiful instead of ugly? My main goal was to create something that would not appall people, that would not terribly upset people, but that would leave people with a feeling of uplifting at best. That would leave women and men who had seen the exhibition and listened to the interviews. I wanted them to leave with the feeling of a lot of terrible things are happening. Human beings are capable of doing horrors to others, as we know. And there are always ways out of this. We can survive, and more, we can live as whole persons afterwards. There is no guarantee that this might be easy, but it's possible. So I thought it must be 100 women, and we will see who out of them experience violence. It was not a criterion for me which women I asked. Did she or did she not experience violence? I just wanted a vast variety of women, young ones, middle-aged, my age, old. I wanted a vast majority of, a vast variety of professions, of countries they came from, to show the huge variety we are. And then, of course, 100 is not enough, but it gave an impression. You can see only 6 here because there's not more space, but I ended up with 100. And the one thing I knew from the beginning was it would be 99 women, and the 100th portrait would be a mirror, same size as the portraits. So the person, women and men, who see the exhibition would become a part of it. And one other thing that was clear to me from the beginning was that I would be a part of that exhibition also, because I didn't want to create something for them or over them, but with them. So it should be us. And the next thing to think about was, of course, the questions I would ask the women. The plan was to have portraits and to have interviews. And it was of major importance what questions you would ask, I would ask, in order to get what I wanted, namely something that is not focusing on victimhood, but that is focusing on whatever happens to us, however horrible it might be, and even if we feel for a while that we are being reduced to the horrible thing that happened to us, we still stay a whole person. And we still have a lot more qualities than being a victim. So I was thinking hard about very smart, clever questions, could not come up with any. So finally I ended up with very simple questions that again and again proved to be openers, window and door openers to the women I asked for me and for the whole interview. And of course the most important question was the first one, because that would set the setting. And it showed that it was the right question I asked, namely the first question in each interview. They were all like 20 minutes long only. The first question is, what are you proud of in your life? And that made a totally different setting for the whole interview. Well, each woman knew what this would be about. Like the issue was violence, and the issue was becoming a part of an exhibition everybody in the, not in the world, but in Germany would be able to see and to listen to. Well, each woman knew what was coming. There is still the big difference when you are sitting there, two people, you ask the question and you listen to the answer. And you will not be surprised to hear that especially the old and older women had a little problem with that question, because they and I belong to the generation where it was a non-issue, a no-go area to be proud of yourself. But one of the very uplifting things in these interviews was that even the old women, each of them came up with answers finally. Some had to go some ways around and say, well, pride is something I cannot really deal with, but maybe I can tell you what I'm grateful for, or what I feel maybe I did okay. So they came up with answers. The second question was an equally simple one, but in reality it's not so easy. Obviously, the second question was, what did you enjoy, or do you enjoy, in being a woman? And the answers to that question taught me that we as women, all over the countries, over the ages, across borders, have a lot more similarities than I ever had thought we would. This is something I had not expected. And the third question then is heading for the problems. What did you experience as a downside? And of course, those answers came pretty quickly. And only the fourth question deals with the issue of this exhibition, namely, did you ever experience violence in your life? And it was not unexpected, but still shocking and moving and hard to take at times, to listen to the answers and to realize that it's even more than every fourth or fifth woman who experienced crass violence at least once in their lives. And not to leave it there, there had to be a fifth question that ended the interview, and that fifth question was, well, if the fairy comes to you and you have 3 wishes, what does the fairy have to do in order for our kids, the girls and the boys, to grow up without fear and with a feeling of dignity instead? And it belongs to the most surprising and uplifting and best experiences in my life. With what an amount of wonderful ideas those women came up. They range from philosophically deep to very practical small things, and all those in combination would change the world. And what I learned in the process of this exhibition is, and that's related to all the political work we do, and it's related to peace work in the first place. The word that occurred most in all those interviews is respect. And nearly every woman mentioned the word respect. Like, it's missing, we should have more of it, it's needed, but it came from them. And I understood, which of course we know if we think about it, that is the key. If we respect ourselves, if we really learn to respect ourselves, that does not mean we cannot become a victim anymore. But it means we get up quicker, we fight back quicker, we feel worth fighting back, and we feel we deserve a better life. And if we respect the other persons, each and every person, then our threshold to act violently against them, or to despise them, or to look down on them is high. The more we respect another person, the less we can do that. I mean, that does not make us saints, we are still human beings, but the overall feeling of respect would create the justice we need to be able to live in peace. So it belongs to the greatest experiences in my life, although it was very hard to take at times that I could finish that exhibition. That not only it was seen and premiered in November 2011 in Heidelberg, my hometown, but that it has been traveling ever since. And last week I opened it for the 63rd time. And this is such an amazing success that I would never have dreamt of it when I started out. And the great thing with it is that for once in my life, this work and the experience with it gives me the feeling that if we do something, and if we show ourselves, and if we give words to the things that happen to people and show ourselves as victims and persons, that it makes a difference, that it reaches people, that it moves people, and that it moves something. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very nice presentation. I would like to welcome questions in the room. If there's any question to Annette.
Yeah, ask me.
This was about physical violence only, or?
Yeah. I mean, I put the question very general in order to make all answers possible. But yes, it was about physical violence.
So it's even, the ratio is even higher when it comes to psychological violence.
Yeah, of course.
So,
And the most important experience with this work, time and again, is that if you do something and you do it for a long time and you do it intensely, somehow you get the feeling everybody else on earth knows this anyway. And they don't act on it, so maybe they don't want to, what do I know? But you get the feeling that everybody knows it anyway, and you are not telling anything new to anybody. And it's an ongoing experience, a repeated experience that even in, mostly it's women's organizations that are inviting me. And even in those circles, it's highly unusual to talk about yourself. Even there, you talk about numbers, about statistics, about it should not be done. And it's very unusual, obviously, to say we. It's even more unusual to say I. And sometimes I can feel the literal, I think in English the expression is also the needle in the, no, that's a different one. Like a certain kind of silence that is palpable. Many times when I open the exhibition and you have like 100 people sitting around, and when it comes the first time, when I don't do it anyway, each time, but many times I say, and we as victims, or when this occurred to me, and there's a kind of silence that is like, there she goes, and this happened to her, and now look at her, do we see it? That's normal, but it shows us that it's still very rare that people talk about themselves. And I'm not saying everybody should stand in front of an audience and say I was a victim, but it makes a difference. Like these women's faces make a difference. Many of them experienced horrible things, not all of them, but many. And you don't see it. You wouldn't know it, like in reality. And then you see the person and you listen to them and you realize it on a very deep level what can happen to people and how we can do something to get over it. Yeah.
You had a question?
Yeah, actually I have two questions.
Okay.
One is quite sure, I was just wondering, out of curiosity, as a woman, you asked, well, but in your exhibition,
Yeah.
Are there women from Germany, all of them, or did you go abroad?
These are all German.
Okay.
Interviews were conducted in German.
Okay.
All these women are living in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah.
But my other question is, I would like to hear a few more concrete examples about what the women answered to your questions, especially, for example, the question, what are you most proud of, or what the family should do. If you have, just to give us a few examples, more concrete examples.
Yeah, well, what were the women proud of? Many women, not surprisingly, said, I'm proud of my children. And of course they all then said, well, I mean, I'm just grateful that they came out this way, but in a way, And what they mean with it is they are proud, not that they created them that way, but that they could help them grow up and become good persons. And some women were proud to have been able to survive their own horror stories without getting bitter. That was one of the very moving things that in these interviews I did not meet one single woman that was totally full of bitterness in spite of horrible experiences. That meant that all of them had gone a long way already. Because of course you have your times of bitterness and of anger and of being crushed. But all the women that took part in this said it in a way like, well, this was a long way, or it was a hard way, but finally what happened to me made me the person I am. And I finally learned to accept it, to make it my past and not my present, but to live with it. And that is a feeling of growing. And some of the women, yes, were proud of that. And the fairy, well, one woman, for example, said, the fairy should make that each and every person should live in the body of their worst enemy for 3 days, or in the person they despise most, so that they can change their views. Or another one said, the fairy should console people who act violently and hurt others, so that they feel their own pain and do not feel forced to delegate their pain on others. So those are the deep answers, and it was not like, oh, it's a concept, but it was a feeling. That was very touching. Or the fairies should give all children a very extra skin that would enable the kids that painful things would not come in, but that all the feelings of need and love and whatever from inside could come out easily. Or the fairy should make that all boys should wear pink all over the globe until nobody would ridicule it anymore, because then something would have changed also. So it's a huge variety. Or the fairy should make that we as women see ourselves through our own eyes and not through the eyes of others, like we are used to. So it's a very broad variety. Yeah.
Thank you, Annette. No more questions? I will ask you a question.
Okay.
I would like to know if you had women from Africa in your...
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's interesting to know, in Africa, I mean, in most of countries in Africa, we are grown up in a system, traditionally and culturally, that really doesn't bring out the self-esteem and the self-confidence to women.
Mm-hmm.
It's discriminative societies where women don't have a word to say, they don't have power, and I'm curious to know in your interviews how women are affected by that, and because I was affected personally.
Yeah,
And
you come from
especially
Romania.
especially when you're born in a family where there are no boys, you know, it's like they wasted the time. Your parents wasted time. You're not considered like meaningful and useful in the society. You have to fight for your rights. So for me, it's really interesting to know in your interviews how you experience that and how it affects them. You know.
Well, I'm not sure whether I can really say something qualified about that because it's very single experiences, but I can tell you something about the black women. There's one black woman, obviously, but she's from Brazil.
Yeah.
And the one interesting aspect she brought into the interview was, of course, about racism, like all black people mentioned, of course, unfortunately. And she talked about the racism in her home country. She began by saying, I'm living in Berlin and being a black person in Berlin is no problem at all. It's way harder to be a Turkish person here when it comes to racism. I found that interesting. And she said, but back home in Brazil, we were very much affected. And while we think or are used to see Brazil as a country, a melting pot and everybody is equal, she said, well, when we are Christians and when we had the Christmas plays at school and you play Jesus and Mother Mary and the angel, it was always clear that I would never be Jesus or Mother Mary or an angel. That would always be the few white kids in the class. And that hurt. And I think there are 3 or 4 women from Africa in the exhibition. One is from Somalia, and she had to leave the country at the age of 8 because she was a victim of genital mutilation, and she had the luck to be treated in Germany, and she stayed there. And she's an amazing person because she said, well, I belong to a nomadic people, and girls are not much in my society. And genital mutilation is the all over the place thing. And my personal fate is that I was lucky to get out of it, and that I was lucky enough to turn all the downsides into good sides. So she was overwhelmingly positive. I was amazed. And she's going back from time to time and trying to make a change. I did not ask these women about their upbringing, so I cannot really answer your question. But I can just reflect my impression of those women. And another one is Sister Fatou Diallo, who comes from Senegal, lives in Berlin now, and is a famous hip-hop queen in Senegal. I didn't even know that existed. And her issue also is genital mutilation, and that's her struggle of a lifetime. She goes back every year 2 times and does workshops with girls, where she talks about, this happened to me, it nearly destroyed me, it hurt me terribly, and I want you to do everything you can to make this not happen anymore. And she's having an impact. So there are strong women, and you are a strong woman.
Gunnar has a question.
Maybe I I missed something because I came late, but if you didn't have time for it, what's the cause of the silence? What's the cause of the silence?
The silence where? About what?
About the pain, about the mistreatment, about the violence. As a doctor, I have found it very often so very difficult to get the story from women.
Yeah.
It is difficult, and there have been 3 reasons that I have thought I perceived: guilt, shame, and solidarity. Solidarity means I don't want to expose my husband because he has improved himself or something. But the guilt and shame was there.
Yeah.
And it's a bit, is that the difference there between sexual violence and other violence?
In my
Maybe you answer this question.
in my experience, yes.
Yes.
This is a very good and a very difficult, a very good question that is difficult and complex to answer. And I experienced it many times, the helplessness of people who want to help in the face of this silence. And I can contribute from my own experience and from the experience of many of the women who experienced violence. Mostly it is shame that seals your mouth, and there is a huge variety of feelings. It is a difference whether you were being abused as a child and didn't have even names for what happened to you, only a terrible feeling, or if it happens to you when you are a grown woman. And it's a big difference whether this happens to you and you are very insecure already, or it happens to you as a strong person. There's one, I go the way back to your question. There's one woman, Yasmin, from who I learned what a difference it makes when you are a very proud, strong person without any feelings of I don't deserve it. And it happened to her that she was being raped by 2 men, brutally, in a situation where she had never expected this would happen. And to my question, how did you cope with this? She went, and did you feel ashamed? She said, what? Ashamed? I was outraged. And there was never 1 second I was ashamed. And I told my friends afterwards, I was traveling with, and I must tell you, they went there, and I think they beat them up terribly. And do I feel bad about that? No. And would I have gone and to the police? No. Because they would have treated me badly anyway. I would have had to prove it, and I couldn't, and I thought, no, leave me alone. So but that is the only woman I know that never wasted 1 second with feeling ashamed. She was outraged, and she felt this, I don't deserve this, and that was it. And for all the others and all the shades in feeling bad, it's most of all shame. And the shame comes from, or the other way around, if you, many of us at one point in their lives become a victim of abuse of any kind. But not all of us become a victim of physical violence and sexual violence. And that is a kind of experience that those who never experience it are having a hard time to understand. It is the experience of total helplessness, of utter, I'm not here anymore, I cannot defend myself, I cannot make this not happen. It is something you feel so bad about that you don't want anybody to see it, because you always have the feeling, I should have been able to avoid this. Had I been strong enough, I could have avoided it. Why did this happen to me in the first place? And you don't want to show yourself so utterly weak and vulnerable. I mean, none of us wants to be caught in a moment where they are crying bitterly or feeling very down. And that is how you present yourselves then. So it's a very complicated mixture of guilt and shame. And it may be a consolation for you as a person that wants to help, that the offer to help alone is a help. I can give you a small example. The most terrible time in my life was when I was a child, between 10 and 12. And I never talked about any of what happened to anybody. And I felt terribly and utterly alone, left behind, and powerless. And I had a very, very nice teacher, a woman, and one day, after everybody else had left the class, she said, Annette, if there's anything you ever want to talk about, no matter what, you can come to me. And the way she looked at me and the way she said that is something I never forgot. And I froze. I was like Lord's wife. I was, and I thought, oh my God, so it's written here, she sees it, but I never forgot it. And it was a huge help that there had been one person that had not only seen I was in need, but that had addressed it. So that may be a consolation for you.
Thank you. No more questions in the group?
Okay, thank
It's
you
okay.
for
Thank you
listening
very
so
much.
intensely.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now it's time for cake.
Now it's time for cake.
Again. We can take every time we have heard the lectures.
Yes, you're rewarded with cakes whenever you're
I have so many questions for you.
Yeah,
Back to the-
okay.
Now you can do a couple of things the next 20, 15 minutes.